Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about another recent Criterion release from October 2021, and this is The Incredible Shrinking Man, a film from 1957 that was directed by Jack Arnold and starring Grant Williams. And in its time, I don't think anybody would have ever expected The Incredible Shrinking Man to make it to a prestigious boutique label 65 years later. In fact, I'm pretty sure of that. But here it is, and not only has it come to Criterion on a 4K digital restoration, but Criterion has loaded it with extras, including a brand new commentary by Tom Weaver. And Criterion has been rather stingy with its putting new commentaries on its most recent releases. So and this is one one commentary you probably want to listen to. And The Incredible Shrinking Man was part of it was made at Universal International. They were making a whole bunch of kind of horror science fiction mishmash movies, very low budget. They had this was their B movie part of their company, and Jack Arnold, who directed this film, was a studio contract director, and he had made some very successful movies in the 3D craze. By the time Shrinking Man came along, the craze was done, and some of these films, not just from Universal International, played on the fears that people had over the atomic bomb and the radiation, that the fallout of the atomic bomb. In 1957, there was people building bomb shelters in their backyards because you might survive the bomb, but are you going to survive the radiation? And there was a film a few years before Shrinking Man, which was called Them, with a exclamation mark. And this was a film that was about radiation in the southwest United States desert area where A-bombs were being tested. And they produced these giant ants that attack people. And they end up, I believe, in the LA sewer system, because where else would you want to go if you're an ant? Go to LA sewer system. But it was a big hit. So everybody had a copy of that concept of radiation, but of course, as I say, it was a legitimate anxiety. I remember I was about 10 years old when this movie came out, or probably 10 years old when I first saw it on TV. It was 57, it was probably on TV by 58, 59. But everybody felt that, so it was, and the radiation in Shrinking Man is sort of a mist that comes over the ocean and envelops Grant Williams. It takes a while for it to come into effect. But as I say, this was a legitimate anxiety, and that somehow the whole bomb, fear of the bomb, has dissipated through the decades, and I don't even think people think about it much anymore. And so when I saw it, it wasn't one of my favorites. I loved Them. This one wasn't probably one of my favorites, although it has some memorable scenes in this film. But seeing it as an adult, I was struck almost right away by the idea, the metaphor of the film. The anxiety of the film is really male anxiety. And in the 1950s, men were the breadwinners, and there was still that effect that if your wife went to work, it was a commentary on how you weren't able to, bring home the bacon, so to speak, and as Grant Williams begins to shrink, he's no longer able to provide an income for his wife. They don't have kids, which is pretty unusual too, because we're in the midst of the baby boom in the mid-1950s, and of course the loss of the conjugal bed as well. So The Shrinking Man might have a little bit more metaphors to it than just the bomb and the fear of radiation. And then, so the first third of the film is his adjusting to life, and which his place in his home. He's got to live in a dollhouse, attacked by the family cat, and probably the most memorable sequence in the movie. And then the final 2/3 of the movie is presumed dead, and he's lost in the basement. And now he has to prove his mettle, prove his masculinity. He has to fight the elements. What seems normal to us, a spider crawling across the wall, a leaky water heater, paint drying up that you could get stuck in. Where do you go for shelter? He has to really prove his mettle as a man, and on his own, and with limited resources at his disposal. How do I eat? He's gone down to the level of a science fiction, living on another planet almost. So one's response to this movie might depend on on how convincing you find the special effects, because obviously this is a difficult movie to buy if you think the special effects look kind of chintzy. And there is a discussion in the supplements by two special effects experts, a recent, and it goes on for like 25 minutes. It's really good, and how they had the challenges that they faced, how they did some of the process shots. I found the scale to be more distracting than anything else. But even more than that, the fact that this is a 4K restoration, so the non-processed scenes are some of them are just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, the clarity and the brightness, and then you go to the process shots, and they can't do the same kind of restoration on the process shots, according to these special effects experts. So there's a kind of clash there, where you're kind of taken into, wow, I can count the hairs on Grant Williams' head, and he's got a lot of hair on his head. And then, couldn't they do a little bit better than this and some of these special effects? And then we get a conversation with the director Joe Dante, and this goes on for about 25 minutes. And he actually met the director Jack Arnold and talked to him about the movie, and I guess in the 1980s. But Dante really he's like a textbook on these kind of films from the 1950s. Obviously had a big influence on his own career. And we get a 50-minute documentary called Auteur on Campus, Jack Arnold at Universal. And Arnold, again, a Universal International contract director, master of the 3D form, even though he didn't care for it himself. And this is really good, because we get, it's not just Arnold, we get a whole sense of what these films were like, and what the appeal was for audiences. And then we get an archival interview with Jack Arnold himself from the 1980s that was made by a German television company. And they include, and this is extensive too, like 25 minutes, where they include outtakes that weren't actually shown in the original German broadcast, because they had some outtakes that concern specifically the incredible shrinking man. Interview with Chris Matheson, and he's the son of Richard Matheson. And my interpretation of the film as a kind of a masculine anxiety comes to the fore here, and in some of the other supplements. And Matheson he would go on to have a fantastically successful career, wrote many of the most memorable Twilight Zones and many movies made from his novels, his screenplays. But at the time of Shrinking Man, and the original title was Shrinking Man, his novel was Shrinking Man, he was at the end of his tether. He had 2 young children. he had to provide for his family, and he wasn't. And if this book that he worked on, they rented a house. He had it for a few months, and where he was going to write, his final effort. Otherwise, he would have to go work for his. If it wasn't successful, he was going to have to go work for his brother in the business world. So Under the Gun had 2 small children, so he went down into the basement of his house, and he wrote Shrinking Man in the basement, surrounded by all these kind of in exile himself, surrounded by all of these elements that he would integrate into the novel. And then of course, this was successful. This was bought, and his career went on from Shrinking Man. So then we have this audio commentary with Tom Weaver, and this is a blast. I think it's very entertaining, very lively. He's interviewed a lot of the people, and also collected interviews with a lot of the people involved, and he used local theater actors. Where he lives in New York to recite, impersonate each character, so he doesn't read them himself, and they give some. That concept really works well because you actually think you're listening to the people. They're so good at it, and but overall, I mean, he really belittles Incredible Shrinking Man. That's pretty unusual for a commentator. I mean, sometimes you see, a pretty good movie, but when you listen to the commentary, it's a masterpiece, one of the greatest movies ever made. And you don't usually get commentaries that are so critical of the movie. And he was critical of Grant Williams' performance. It was too one note. And some of the absurdities in the plot, some of the special effects. He said, couldn't Universal hire some extras or stand-ins, children, And you notice in some of the scenes, they could have made it look much more realistic had they used that. Integrated, children into the mix of the special effects. But nevertheless, I mean, this is, if you really love Incredible Shrinking Man, you might not want to listen to this commentary. It might offend you, but I really enjoyed it a lot. And I love it when they try to find supporting players, especially the kind of mostly obscure supporting players that were in Shrinking Man. Randy Stewart played Grant Williams' wife. And he found her, I guess this was in the 1990s, I think it was Alexis Smith was a good friend of hers, and he asked her if Randy Stewart would be willing to be interviewed, and she said, oh, and she says, she's really sick, but then she did. She was eager to tell her story about her experience. She really liked Grant Williams a lot, and he went through so much, she said, in those scenes in the basement. He went home bruised every day. And then he also, in another kind of nice little anecdote for people who are interested in supporting players in movies, April Kent is the other female in the cast who has a small but significant part to play, and she was the daughter of June Havoc, and Tom Weaver didn't know June Havoc, but found her phone number because she didn't live that far away from him. And when he called her, just taking a chance, supposedly it was June Havoc's secretary, and he explained he wanted to interview April Kent if she was available and willing. And he was informed, well, unfortunately, she passed away a couple of years ago. She was living in London, and Weaver suspected that he wasn't talking to the secretary. He was talking to June Havoc herself, but she was so uncomfortable with it that he didn't pursue any more of it. But his commentary is full of just really kind of entertaining kind of anecdotes that I really enjoyed. Then we have a fold-out continues on with the kind of artwork, and this artwork seems to be kind of a tribute to Saul Bass, the kind of thing that Saul Bass might have come up with. You see it here as well. And then there is one. I'll try to fold it out so you can get some idea of the basement adventures of the shrinking man. He actually lives in that matchbox. That's his home, his refuge. In the basement. And then we get an essay by Jeffrey O'Brien, it's also really good. So just a great presentation. Whether you buy the special effects, the whole concept of the movie is really fascinating, and the history behind it as well. So, and Criterion did a great job in the supplements, and you know, it was another great experience in a recent Criterion release. This is the kind of thing you really want out of Criterion. I think they delivered again here. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen to me this far. I really do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. You guys take care.